the things we're learning is the diversity of needs to develop a wood industry at all kinds of levels. And so this panel is focusing on one of those needs, is really understanding the values beyond high value timber. Are there some other things that we can value in private forests, and how an understanding of those benefits, what those are, what those values are, they can help support sustainable management and use of wood products. So we've got a great panel with us today, and I'll introduce each of the speakers as they come up. As we did in the morning, they'll speak for 10 minutes or so. I'll give you a warning at 10 minutes, and then you'll have a couple minutes to wrap up. And then we'll have time for questions after the three speakers have presented. Our first speaker is Arjun Dur. And Arjun is the Director of Product Development at the American Forest Foundation, and he leads the innovation and development of a range of programs and practices that harness the potential of carbon and forest product markets for afforestation and reforestation across the U.S. Arjun is a serial entrepreneur with a demonstrated history of businesses in the sustainable agriculture and food space in India and South Africa, and he's fundraised for and developed the initiatives for social entrepreneurs around the world in his former role as the Director of Partnership Management at Ashoka. Arjun? You don't need, oh, that's for notes and things. Okay, we've got the presentation.
Thank you. I'm attempting to explain how carbon credits work, so I do need some notes to help me with some of the technicalities. I promise this won't be boring. Okay, so first, bienvenidos a todos. Thank you, Scott and team, for putting this together and for having me here. And also, I'd like to thank a lot of our panelists and speakers that have spoken before me. You've really helped set a lot of the context for some of the things I'm going to touch on today, from dynamics of the timber industry to the potential in Puerto Rico. Thank you all for sharing that knowledge. Okay, ready to go to next? So I am the Director of Product Development. What that means is American Forest Foundation has developed different programs to support family forest landowners across the US. So what that means is finding methodologies, developing methodologies that improve the health of forests, which have so many different benefits, but American Forest Foundation is zooming in on the carbon benefits of this. And how do we turn that into a credit? And how can that turn into a revenue stream for landowners? About 2 years ago, American Forest Foundation started looking at reforestation and afforestation as a potential. So that is when I joined. I was brought in to scope and see what kind of opportunity is available and what is the dynamic of landowners who don't have trees on their land, but could potentially be incentivized to do so, either partially moving some of their farm into trees or completely. So the opportunity is this: over 133 million acres in the US to restore forest cover. And my job is building connections with different farming cooperatives, different community development organizations, different NRCS chapters across the country to understand how people feel about carbon farming, leasing out their land to produce carbon, and what incentives actually can help them. And that takes it to the main point: can this be an economically viable alternative or additional revenue stream? Okay, next. So there's this really cool website. It's called Reforestation Hub. It's a map of the mainland US, and it shows what the reforestation potential looks like. This research was done by Dr. Susan Cook-Patton at the Nature Conservancy. So you have a total opportunity of about 132 million acres, and a lot of these are pasture land, used for cattle grazing and cattle production is by far the biggest. My first week on the job, when we were trying to figure out what my priorities are, this was what I based them off of. I guess I'm going to be talking to cattle farmers and understanding dynamics of that industry. Floodplains is another big focus area that I focused on. And in terms of ownership, as you can see, private land ownership is leading the way with 114 million acres. So how are you working with private landowners and addressing their concerns or improving their business models? Ready to go next? Okay, so American Forest Foundation has spent a lot of time researching and understanding what is the best quality carbon credit. How do you ensure you achieve that quality? There are a lot of carbon project developers out there right now. A lot of them are guided by so many different principles. This is me kind of sharing what really motivates and kind of stabilizes us as we think about it. So how do we make it high quality? How do we ensure high quality towards farmers and landowners? Carbon credits and the carbon market has come under criticism for whether it's actually making a real difference in the atmosphere. There are two sides to this criticism: quality of supply and quality of demand. A high quality carbon credit is where high quality supply meets that high quality demand. High quality demand occurs when the buyer of the credit is purchasing it as part of a larger sustainability plan, in which it's first assessed and addressed emissions in its own operations and supply chains to avoid, minimize, rectify, and reduce them, and then purchase carbon credits to address and finance the generation of carbon credits outside its operations to address its residual emissions. So high quality supply occurs when the supplier of the carbon credit, that's us in this case, ensures the credit is representing a real lasting impact on the atmosphere. This can be determined by how robustly, transparently, completely, and conservatively the supplier has addressed additionality, permanence, leakage, double counting, monitoring. There are a lot of technicalities here, which I'm happy to go into the specifics of later. But how all of this is done with the verification of a third party, and no net harm or sustainable development guidelines. So scientific consensus around how these are best ensured exists, but it is still evolving as we learn more about how different carbon credit activities interact with the global process. Okay, next. So the next thing I'll touch on is kind of what that cycle looks like with all the different people in the space. So we're the project proponents at the bottom of this table. So we basically plan, execute, monitor the carbon credit generating projects using the standards blueprints. The verifiers are kind of like the, the auditors. They check that the project was done according to the standard blueprint and issues reports to the standards body. That informs kind of the buyers who are addressing their residual emissions after following the mitigation hierarchy, and that they can purchase these verified credits from project proponents. That's guided by the regulatory groups who set codes around what makes an actual high quality carbon benefit and what transaction looks like. And that's all monitored by the standard. So an example of a standard is Vera, which is who we work with. And they translate the codes into recognized blueprints around designing credit generating projects for suppliers to plan and implement these projects. They can also accredit verifiers that are qualified to validation and verify projects against those blueprints. So I'll give an example of what all this looks like in action. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay. So, actually, can we go to the next slide and I'll come back to this one? Okay. So, for example, we had to look at land that did not have much forest activity going on. So I spent a lot of time in the south, Alabama and Georgia, for example, looking at cattle farms that were not able to continue their production. Or the farmer is too old, not able to keep up with their farm. Succession planning was an issue. Their children are not interested. The soil is too poor. Changing weather patterns have affected their ability to maintain the same production. I talk to them. I spend lots of time with them. I understand what's missing and what they need. What does stability look like to them? I've spent about 2 years on the field, going from extension agent to extension agent in these different counties, understanding it. And then what we do is we look at the utility of planting trees for timber. Finance is the main motivating factor for a lot of these farmers. So what does the timber benefit look like? And then more importantly, what does the carbon benefit look like? In the case of Georgia and Alabama, pine, that is the center for pine production in the country. So then we calculate with the financial model how much more of a benefit that revenue stream brings with it. And then the interesting thing comes. We give them an offer. So in this particular case, for example, we offered $30 per acre per year for a 30-year contract where we plant the trees, we cover the costs, we cover the establishment of that timber stand. And then we even work with the state forester or a consulting forester to build a forest management plan, and they will help with the management of that land for 30 years. And the very interesting thing is a lot of cattle farmers were interested. They weren't ready to enroll all of their land, but parts of it. So that's why silvopasture becomes something that we are studying very heavily. Okay, so we'll go back to the previous slide. Yeah, thank you. So how do we kind of assess what's a good idea and when do we move, when do we scale it? So I live in the feasibility phase. I identify the landowners, I identify the people who actually are excited about this work or see the potential of it. I do it through focus groups. I can't tell you how many times I've been to church. And then we consult with different partners, just locally based community development organizations. And then, like what I touched on earlier in my presentation, we talk to buyers and investors as well. What are they actually interested in? Is what they think they're funding, what they're actually funding. And then we build that financial and programmatic model. Then we pilot it. That's what's happening in Georgia and Alabama right now. We go back, we make track changes on what we've developed, and then we scale it across the state, across the region, and in the country. So Puerto Rico is a particularly exciting area that we've been scoping. There are many levels of context. We are in listening and absorbing phase right now, understanding what the biggest potential is, but more importantly, what landowners actually want and how history has informed their opinion. So I've really enjoyed speaking with all of you over the past few days, and I look forward to more conversations this afternoon as we learn more about the context. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. Our next speaker is Marcus Laws. He's the project director for NCBA CLUSA. You'll have to tell us what. CLUSA, okay. Just read it. It's a multifaceted bilingual practitioner. He is with more than 10 years of experience in cooperative value chain and market systems community development approaches, primarily in Latin America and the Caribbean. He's an experienced project manager that has provided technical, financial, monitoring and evaluation, and administrative support to a $50 million portfolio of primarily USDA-funded projects in the sectors of microfinance, cooperative development, agriculture and food security, and economic growth and trade, primarily in the coffee and livestock industries. He started his career in Paraguay in 2005 as an agroforestry Peace Corps volunteer. He was an agroforestry Peace Corps volunteer in El Salvador between 2006, 2009, and has lived and worked in Cuba, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Spain. He has a bachelor's degree in international relations and a master's in sustainable development, international policy and management from the School of International Training's Graduate Institute. So, Marcus, welcome.
Thank you, William. I think I need to edit that profile. Antes que nada, quiero agradecerle a William Scott, el comité organizador de este evento. Es un honor estar aquí, esa oportunidad de dirigirme a ustedes sobre nuestro proyecto que se llama Café del Futuro. Algo que aprendí anoche de Jameson French. Reconozco que soy un gringo de edad mediano y represento una organización que es nueva aquí en Puerto Rico. ¿Qué es lo que le puedo informar o enseñar a ustedes? O sea, pues estamos comprometidos, yo y la organización, de ganar la confianza de los productores pequeños, dueños de finca privada y lo demás para llevar éxito a nuestro proyecto. Voy a hacer la presentación en inglés. You can go ahead. Please change it. So our project is Café del Futuro. In English, we call it Partnerships for Climate Smart, or Climate Smart Puerto Rican Coffee. It's a partnership of 5 organizations, a couple, 3 local ones. I guess CLUSA is now local, and Sustain Cert, which is our third-party verifying body. You can go to the next one. I structured this trying to go from the macro to the micro, so a little overview of the program in general at the national level, and then down to opportunities for private landowners. You can go to the next. So, Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. This is a new program, completely new, funded through NRCS's central office in DC. It's currently funding 141 pilot projects in national level in all states and territories. It was so popular when it was launched that they set aside $1 billion in funding, but it was so popular they received 1,000 plus proposals that equaled a $20 billion request, so they increased the budget from 1 to 3.2 billion. 3 of those projects are funded here in Puerto Rico, so there's a significant investment in climate smart agricultural production here in Puerto Rico. The objectives of the program are promote, incentivize the implementation of climate smart conservation practices. NRCS's defined climate smart conservation practices. And increase access to markets for those commodities. You can go to the next one. This is just this is their infographic. It shows that pretty much every commodity produced in U.S. territory is included in this program. Yeah, so you can see more if you go to that link. So the context that for our project comes from, as I think over the past day and a half we've already learned about the impact of Hurricanes Maria and Irma. Of the 100+ million trees that were affected or damaged, 20 million of them were coffee and shade trees. The harvest, the coffee harvest that were significantly damaged directly after that, and then later last year after Fiona. According to 2018 Ag Census, there was only about 2,445 coffee farms registered in Puerto Rico, representing about 13,000 acres. Of those, the majority, 1,600 farms and about 9,500 acres are acres under sun, or al raso, without any shade or any sombra. And the majority of those are very small farms, 5.43 cuerdas, or about 5 acres. Many of those farms and private farm owners are also some of these 13,000 non-industrial private forest landowners. There's a couple other stats from the Puerto Rico Forestry fact sheet published earlier this year. I believe it was January or February. Of that, one notable number for me is that there's only about 155 participants in the forest management program. That means there's a lot of opportunities out there for private forest landowners, coffee producers to develop those forest management plans. Another major challenge that producers overall are dealing with is lack of labor. Escasez de mano de obra. That's one of the largest and most frequent complaints, but there's also high cost of production, low prices for the coffee, low production in general because of access to labor. So NCBA CLUSA, the National Cooperative Business Association, the Cooperative League of the U.S., we have cooperative appears twice in our name. We like to promote in all our projects, domestically and internationally, the cooperative model. Out of those thousands of coffee producers, there's only one cooperative, one producer cooperative that represents a handful of their interests. That's Cooperativa Agrocomercial, which has the brand Café Cibales. They have about 60 to 100 producers, members, but the majority of their base or their revenues comes from viviendas and property and land holdings. We understand that there's been significant or bad experiences with cooperatives in the agricultural sector here. Up until the 80s, the largest cooperative at the time was coffee cooperative, Cooperativa de Cafetaleros de Puerto Rico. That was a really big and very successful cooperative, very diversified. The Secretary of Agriculture, the Federal Department of Agriculture would come to their general assemblies. Since then, there haven't been many successes in agricultural cooperatives in Puerto Rico, although Cople in Dulac, the dairy cooperatives, is very strong. Agrocomercial is one of the oldest cooperatives, still operating here. And then I know there's at least two smaller cooperatives that are forming right now. One is in Maricao and another is in the Adjuntas area. The one in Maricao is currently participating in El Instituto Cooperativo, their incubadora de cooperativas here in Rio Piedras. So I show this because there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of projects, a lot of groups that are working with a common goal. You can, which brings me to Café del Futuro. Our overall nuts and bolts, $15 million project. We're going until September 2027, focusing on specialty coffee. I throw in Madera Fina because we are planning to distribute. So when I'm going to get into the incentives, I'll break that down. But our objectives are promote shade-grown agroforestry, multi-nivel forest farming systems for increased resilience, carbon capture, reduction in cost of inputs, and various other benefits. Also, quantify and certify the carbon footprint from a list of 20 NRCS practices that we are going to be promoting. And then I already mentioned promoting the cooperative model as a solution, not necessarily legalize cooperatives, but just collective work to help reduce those challenges or help farmers collectively face the challenges that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So you can go to the next one. Our overall targets, we're trying to reach 2,000 farmers across the island. Pretty ambitious, I know. We're actually finding that even more ambitious now that we have to dealing with some of NRCS's environmental compliance regulations is making it a bit more challenging, but we are very confident and optimistic that we are going to be able to reach that number. We want to have 10,000 acres under climate smart practices. We're going to be distributing, because farmers, they need trees. They need to renovate at least 10% of their farm on an annual basis, but they also need trees for the shade. We saw a picture of Hacienda Caricolillo, which was just un cerro pelado, básicamente. Lots of trees were destroyed during the hurricanes. So we're going to be distributing 2.6 million coffee trees, and the rest shade and hardwood. We are also going to be distributing about $5 million in cash incentives for farmers to be able to implement those practices. We're going to be intervening on up to 5 acres per farm. Just as a pilot project, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time. This is a project, so it's got a useful life of only a couple years. We can't do an entire farm, not 2,000 farms, so we've limited it at this point on up to 5 acres. We'll provide incentives for those farms that are applying the practices. And we have, we think, a realistic carbon sequestration goal of 40,000 metric tons over the life of the project, mainly from sequestration from those new trees that are being planted and a little reductions from some of the practices. You can go on to the next one. This is our list of climate smart practices. We wanted to provide a variety for farmers to choose from, but we, as a project, we are focusing on these 4 that are highlighted in red. Our primary one is multi-story cropping forest farming. And that's the one that requires the shade, and then riparian forest buffers and some of the others. All of them are good for carbon sequestration, improving the quality of the coffee, various other environmental and social benefits. Guess we can move on. You gotta click, there's some animations on here. This is a slide of how we're gonna go about quantifying and modeling our carbon sequestration. So out of those 2,000 farms, we're going to select a subset of 50 farms that we're going to do intensive data collection on. We're calling those model farms. One of our farmers is actually here. Pedro, thank you for attending. And we're going to be estimating the total biomass, the carbon content, diameter of the trees from when they're planted, and then over the life of the project, we'll be checking the growth of the trees. And also be doing a series of computer modeling to supplement the data collected on these 50 farms. We're using iTree, USDA Comet. Comet Planner is a tool promoted through this program, which is not exactly relevant for Puerto Rico just yet. But when it becomes available, we will use it. Cool Farm and the Climate Hub's farm planning tool. We found that to be very useful so far. Criteria, basically you just need to be registered in Farm Service. If you're not and you're interested in participating in the project, we can help you. You can authorize us to help get the paperwork from Farm Service or work with you to deal with all the bureaucracy there. Basically, once we have I mentioned a challenge for the projects. This one, the CPA 52 is the environmental compliance that all 141 projects have to do at every single farm. That's extremely, it's a good tool. It's just a little challenging for staff, technical staff who have never done it before. It requires a lot of trial and error, and that's what's really slowed down our implementation. There have been some groups that are already complaining that we're making overtures and promises that we're going to deliver this, that, and the other, but we are hampered by federal regulations, and we're not moving as fast as we would like to, but it's going to come. It's just a question of time. We've gotten 9 of those approved so far, and so we hope to be distributing trees, planting trees, starting December, January, and then doing the implementation of the practices at the same time. You can go on, trying to get through. So now talk a little bit about the partners. These are us, Calusa, Pro Cafe. NCA CLUSA, we are the U.S.'s oldest and largest trade association for cooperative businesses. We've been around 107 years. We've done work internationally for 75. As William mentioned, I have been working on USDA-funded projects internationally, primarily Food for Progress, most recently in Dominican Republic. We represent cooperative enterprises across the U.S., including some here. La Liga, Fide Co-op have become members of ours. So we want to leverage this membership to add value to our project here as well. Some of these are going to be potential buyers, national co-op grocers. They supply and distribute product to all their members of cooperative grocery stores throughout the nation. I had a conversation with them yesterday, and they're going to be a potential consumer or buyer market for coffee producers here. You can go on, skip this. Pro Cafe, new organization, been around 5 years. They've got a lot of experience in those 5 years. They represent 500, this isn't the correct one. Some of these numbers are a little off, my apologies. They represent 500 coffee producers. Over the past 5 years, they've reached about 1,200 coffee producers across the island through these 3 different projects. They've distributed about 3.2 million trees to their members. So symbolically, they've planted about 1 tree per inhabitant of the island. From their members, a good portion of them actually have wild forest land that could benefit from forest management plans or access to a number of the services that have been discussed here over the past day or so. And 40% from a survey of 75 of their members, 40% of the land that they have is still without any shade. So there's a lot of opportunities for planting more trees to provide shade, agroforestry systems for coffee producers. Their main role is providing technical assistance, farm visits, data collection, outreach, and so on. You can go. La Estación Experimental Agrícola in Mayagüez, they are in charge of our MMRV plan. So some of what Arjun talked about, designing the carbon sequestration models and doing the data collection. Then we have SustainCert, which is our third-party verifier and auditor. They audit for Scope 3 emissions. So these are emissions that corporations, let's say if Coca-Cola supplied coffee from the island, Puerto Rico Coffee Roasters, Burger King, any of one of them could potentially buy the impact units that could be transferred directly to producers participating in the project. And then La Liga de Cooperativas, they've been around 75 years, promoting the cooperative model here on the island. They bring a lot of weight, a lot of interesting experience. They're helping us obviously know the context better than our cooperative movement. So they're helping with promotion, formation, and enamoramiento del modelo cooperativo. All right, this is the last slide. So opportunities. We have a project that's pretty ambitious in scope. We think that we want to aportar nuestro granito de arena to the ecosystem of service provision on the island. There's many people here, many organizations that I've personally knocked on doors to try and see how we can collaborate together to provide more services to rural farmers, private landowners. So that's one way, to just collaborate, not duplicate efforts. The cooperative model, aggregating resources. Also providing links to service providers. In our project, we plan to also provide technical assistance to rural farmers, just helping them get registered with a SAM.gov or UEI numbers. So there's a lot of bureaucracy there, and there's a lot of USDA's rural development has a lot of funding available for rural businesses and many farmers, and Maximilio Trujillo has constantly said he wants more farmers to take advantage of those funds. Last I spoke with him, there's still a lot of funds available and not many people taking advantage of it. And through the project, we also want to see how we can incorporate production under shade, along with existing forest management programs. I briefly talked about access to new markets. So not just carbon markets, but also different buyers, specialty coffee buyers, or whether it be those coffee producers using forest products on their land outside of those 5 acres that we will be intervening with, working with, I don't know, PR Hardwoods, for example, access to new buyers. So diversification of income. We are going to be providing trees, hopefully at some point. It's going to take 20, 30, 40 years for some of those saplings to actually reach maturity, but it's something in the long term. And then our project is aligned with the Puerto Rico Forest Action Plan, so there's that as well. We also submitted a proposal with similar partners as this consortium, as this partnership, for the IRA's Forest Service landowner support program that closed October 20th. There's been a lot of conversation about lacking technical assistance, a concentrated group effort to help raise up or strengthening the emerging hardwood forest products industry. And we have spoken with a number of groups here and submitted a proposal that does exactly that. Granted, it is a project, limited resources, restricted resources, limited time, but we hope to be, if we win, hope to be able to aportar nuestro granito de arena to help build up and strengthen that sector. So that's it. Here's my contact information. You can also contact Pro Cafe if you're interested or know producers who are interested. I can also feel free to find me after this. So I hope I didn't go too fast. But yeah, Café del Futuro. Gracias por esta oportunidad.
Thank you, Marcus. Our next speaker is Dr. Connor Herron. He's the co-founder and the associate director of Carbon Regenerative Community Development, and he brings over a decade of experience facilitating and coordinating projects in Latin America, focused on supporting small-scale sustainable agricultural production and cultivating pro-social partnerships. Connor got a PhD in social ecology at the University of California in Irvine, with a focus on collaborating with rural agricultural communities to support transition towards climate-smart ag practices, mutually beneficial and long-term partnerships, and more circular economic practices. Connor?
Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas ustedes. Es un placer estar aquí. Voy a dar mi presentación en inglés hoy, pero primero quiero decir gracias a Caribbean Climate Hub, a Greenwood y Scott, y Edgar González con el Centro por Conservación del Paisaje. Today, I'm going to be sharing 3 new and old technologies that we're working with here in Puerto Rico to help improve carbon sequestration within agroforestry systems. Next slide. But first, I'd like to share just a little bit about who is CRCD, Caribbean Regenerative Community Development, o en español, Desarrollo Regenerativo de Comunidades Caribeñas. We are a diverse team of environmental experts and professionals that share a common mission. We are working together to help impulsar, to activate the potential for conservation, restoration, and regeneration here in Puerto Rico. And our vision is a future in Puerto Rico where communities and ecosystems prosper together. Next. Okay, the first technology that I want to share is a new one. This is a project that we are collaborating on. It's a landscape scale restoration project being led by another local nonprofit called SACED, based in Sabana Grande, which is also where CRCD was founded and based. And in this part of this project, we are using unmanned aerial vehicles, otherwise known as drones, to help map out about 10,000 acres within the Huanica-Maricao joint priority landscape and identify priority areas for intervention and restoration. So thank you to Caribbean Climate Hub for modifying the presentation here, because we just got some photos in the field today that we're actually flying right now. And this is a picture, this is a Matrix RTK 300, not the kind of drone that you'll find at Costco. It is equipped with a multispectral lens that is allowing us to identify a whole suite of factors that's going to improve our efficiency to identify really high priority areas for intervention. Some of the benefits of mapping with this type of technology is allowing us to, with just a team of 2 people, mapping these 10,000 acres to identify areas where we have infected crops, where we've had damage from forest fires, where we're dealing with plagues, where we are dealing with nutrient deficiencies, soil erosion, deforestation, and so many other factors. So by having this really critical information, it's helping us develop really customized strategies and then pursue additional funding opportunities that will allow us to create interventions strategically in those areas so we can have really high value and high leverage impacts. Next slide. Okay, the next 2 technologies that I want to talk about are part of the Smart Ag Puerto Rico project. And this is also part of the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities program that Marcus was just talking about. And we're really excited about this program. We are working with coffee and cacao farmers around Puerto Rico to help them implement climate smart practices. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means and some of the practices that we're working on in just a moment. We're monitoring the impacts of those practices both in terms of carbon sequestration, greenhouse gas emissions, as well as impacts to biodiversity, ecosystem functioning, and overall forest health. And then finally, we're working to develop a uniquely branded Puerto Rican label for climate smart agricultural products, not applicable just to coffee or cacao, but to any agricultural good in Puerto Rico that's implementing these types of practices so that we can help landowners capture the full value of the critical services that they're providing and earn more for providing and creating these critical forms of services to their communities and the ecosystems that we depend on. Next slide. So why a climate smart initiative? Well, by implementing climate smart practices, we can help reduce costs for producers, we can help improve forest health, we can improve the conditions for laborers and workers on the farms, which is a critical piece. By working under shade versus full sun, you can just imagine as the temperatures are increasing, especially in the summer, it becomes a much more viable form of work, especially if we can also pair that with a reduction in toxic chemicals and exposure to the types of things that nobody really wants to be dealing with in their hands. And then at the end of the day, we're producing a higher quality product. It was fine. Okay, so one of the most important practices that we're working to implement, is similar to what Marcus was just sharing about agroforestry or forest farming, is the implementation of these productive forest ecosystems. And essentially, what forest farming is creating a farm that mimics the characteristics of a natural forest. And if you've ever walked through a forest, you'll see that you're very, very rarely going to see exposed soil. There's always leaf cover protecting that soil that helps reduce the temperature of the soil. It reduces evaporation. It protects it from erosion. So these are the types of characteristics that we want to mimic within our agricultural systems so that we're creating these self-sustaining systems that need reduced inputs, reduced maintenance, and have a much higher resilience against climate change, increased storm damage, but most especially increasing drought and extreme temperatures that we're dealing with. As anyone that was here this last summer, we can feel it that every year it's getting hotter and hotter. And so one of our goals is to help enfriar Puerto Rico un poquito. Just a little bit, not much. Some of our collaborators, but thank you so much, Viviana. As part of this effort, we're working to plant around 60,000 native trees on 2,000 acres of coffee and cacao farms. And we're working with the Department of Natural Resources as well as private farms in Southwest Puerto Rico to help grow and establish those trees that we'll be planting around the island. And another really important piece, As we know, mano de obra, labor, is a critical challenge here in Puerto Rico, and part of our project is to actually help provide the labor needed to implement and plant those trees, to make sure that we are going through that process and implementing these practices mano a mano, hand in hand with our producers. All right, now, thank you. Okay, the next technology that I want to talk about is both an old and a new technology. It's called biochar, and if you haven't heard of biochar before, it is essentially a form of carbon or charcoal that's produced by heating a form of woody biomass up to high temperatures, above 400 degrees Fahrenheit, until it reaches a stable state where once incorporated with the soil, it will not decompose. So this form of carbon can stay solid and will stay in the soil for hundreds, if not thousands of years. This technique was actually developed in the Amazonians thousands of years ago. And today, if you've heard of Tierra Preta or the Amazonian dark earths, we can still find these deposits of rich carbon-based soils that are black, very fertile, and that have endured more than 500 years of heavy rains, and they help also raise the pH of our acidic tropical soils. So they're of particular interest within a tropical context and have a really impressive potential to help sequester carbon. Some estimates are indicating that if we applied biochar broadly in agricultural zones, it could help us achieve upwards of 90% of the needed CO2 reductions globally to meet climate change targets. So this is a really important technology with a lot of potential for greenhouse gas benefits and carbon sequestration. Importantly with biochar is it's like a sponge. So both for water, it helps retain moisture in the soil, but also for nutrients. So before applying biochar, it's really important to inoculate this with a form of biofertilizer that can be compost. In our case, we're producing a high-quality bioferment using fish waste from local fisheries in southwest Puerto Rico, and we're basically fermenting that anaerobically without oxygen with a combination of molasses and other bio-inputs to create a really nutrient-rich fertilizer that's full of healthy microorganisms that can both help support ecosystem and microbial health in the soil, as well as provide critical nutrients to the plants that they're surrounding. Okay, next slide. So when we talk about biochar, it's really important to talk about the feedstock because not all feedstocks are appropriate. If you're trimming branches on your farm, many times it's better to leave that wood to naturally decompose and provide those nutrients back into the soil. It's much less energy intensive, and the fertility there is a critical way to close those nutrient cycles, just like another forest ecosystem would do. Bamboo is an ideal feedstock for making biochar in Puerto Rico because, one, it grows extremely fast, so you can harvest from the same bamboo crop or the same clump every year on an annual basis. It also is right now not very well used or utilized. So most of the bamboo in Puerto Rico is ending up in landfills and being burned or incinerated. It creates lots of hazards on roads. It's creating problems with flooding, and it's contributing to wildfire danger. So by creating a productive use for this biomass, we're actually changing a problem into part of the solution for how we regenerate our soils. Okay, next slide. So this brings us to our partner, BioRestorative Ideas, which is another young company based in Hormigueros. And they are helping revitalize and bring back to life an old sugarcane processing facility, the Antigua Central Urega. And they are using what they like to describe as a giant pizza oven to pass these bamboo pellets, once they're processed into a uniform size, through this long conveyor belt oven where that bamboo is heated, like I was saying, to a high temperature, and it's a process called pyrolysis to convert that bamboo into a form of charcoal, which we are then inoculating with our biofertilizer in preparation for implementation on farms. Next slide. This is just another picture of the facility there. You can go next slide. Okay, so just to summarize some of the benefits of using bamboo biochar, it can provide an important form of phosphorus and nitrogen, help improve the pH of acidic soils. It can help sequester up to and around 2 tons of carbon for every 1 ton of biochar that we produce. So it's got a lot of potential for carbon sequestration. It acts as a sponge to help improve moisture retention in the soils, so it can help improve drought tolerance. It can enhance food production as a form of fertilizer, and then it can help build circular local economies and create circular jobs to support our local community. Next slide. Okay, so we're just trying to give a really brief overview of these 3 important technologies, and I'd be happy to go into more detail as we go into the question and answer session. But just as the quick summary, you know, the three of the technologies, I wouldn't say these are all of our technologies, but these are 3 that we really wanted to share today that are applicable to this panel and conversation around carbon. Using unmanned aerial vehicles or drones to help identify highly strategic areas for intervention. The use of agroforestry practices to mimic the forest ecosystems while also promoting productivity. And that can both involve timber as well as non-timber agroforestry products. So a big focus for us is coffee and cacao, but we're also really interested in helping farmers incorporate things like spices, cinnamon, vanilla. We can incorporate ginger and turmeric into these systems. There's black pepper is another great one. There are so many products that can be grown really successfully within an agroforestry system here in Puerto Rico. So the sky is really the limit, I think, as we talk about that potential. And then something that we're really excited about is actually the biochar. We're the first large-scale implementation of biochar in the Caribbean area. And we're really excited to demonstrate the potential of that here and help improve the access and incentives available to producers and forest landowners here in Puerto Rico as we move forward. And then just to share one of the next steps that are kind of where we're looking and moving towards, we recently just submitted a conservation innovation grant through NRCS in collaboration with the American Forest Foundation and Mano y Ola here in Puerto Rico that would allow us to continue refining and evaluating these technologies, developing the methodologies and getting them approved by verifiers such as Vera, so that we can actually attract that private dollar investment, expand the opportunity for implementing these types of practices to thousands of additional acres in Puerto Rico, and help Puerto Rico achieve its potential to be a world leader in climate-smart agricultural and forestry production. So with that, I'll say gracias, and thank you all so much. We look forward to the questions.